Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 4 of Beyond the Crease, a Grassroots Cricket original podcast. Today, we will be discussing the future of Test cricket at large with a very, very special guest. He's a rock star when it comes to cricket journalism, really. And over the years, he's written many Cricket Info articles that we've all read and loved. You also may remember him from Polite Inquiries. And he has his YouTube channel these days on which he has several different things like the Last Knock videos, and co-founder, of course, of 99.94 DM, on which you can find all of his podcasts, such as The Wagon Wheel, Double Century, and The Red Inker. I have with me the one and only Mr. Jarrod Kimber. Jarrod, how are you doing over there? And did I miss anything?
Oh, you missed hundreds of things, but that's just because I'm old. I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as well. And thank you for agreeing to do this. So the topic today is the future of Test cricket. And I think what better place to start off than Bazball, really. I mean, I know Brendan McCullum doesn't like to call it that, but this partnership of Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes is literally revolutionizing cricket, and just the way they were belligerent in Pakistan and scored, 505 runs in a single day in Rawalpindi. Albeit, that was Rawalpindi, and we can get to that later. But really, they've taken the game by the scruff of its neck. And I mean, you can argue that they are one of those teams that have the resources to kind of deploy those sort of tactics and go about their cricket in that certain way. And not every team might have those resources, so they can't particularly replicate Bazball, and every team might have its own way. But in the grand scheme of things, do you think that the introduction of this brand of aggressive cricket will impact the sport at large and definitely, increase the run rate or average run rate across tests the world over?
They would have to be successful at it for a while in order to make it stick. If you saw them against South Africa, they didn't quite look as glorious as they did at times against India and New Zealand and Pakistan. And part of the reason was that the pitchers were just doing stuff, right? So try hitting through the line when the ball's moving. And I think that, Pakistan was almost the perfect place to do it because, sorry to Rambo, but those pitches are pretty flat, right? And so from that perspective, I could certainly see how it's made a small splash at the moment. The big splash is if you go back and you look at the West Indies, it takes the West Indies a very long time to become a consistent winning test team with 4 fast bowlers, right? Australia is slightly different when they have their revolution, what is it, from 1999 onwards, only because Gilchrist was dropped into that side. So he was naturally going to bump the strike rate up a little bit. But also they were a really good side before. So that's the big difference that you've got here with, I would say that the current England system is probably more like the West Indies one where, the West Indies, it came out of losing, right? They got hammered by India. Or did India chase over 400 in the West Indies against their spinners? Clive Lloyd looks around and goes, well, we just went to Australia. 2 pace bowlers bounced us and we basically lost the series. Now we've come back, we play India, we've used our spinners and they've smashed them everywhere. Why don't we just try all of our pace bowlers? And even, as I said, that takes time to do. Those are the 2 teams that changed Test cricket. And if you look at what they did specifically, it was, it's a combination of coming up with a new method and being good at it, right? And when we're talking about probably 1 and 2 best test teams of all times when we're throwing those guys out there. So England would have to be much better than they have been so far. They would have to be consistent. It would have to travel. All those sorts of things. I mean, they're about to go up against the best team probably in Test cricket at the moment. Certainly in English conditions, you would have to say Australia should be, coming up against them as probably favourites on pure talent. If they could beat Australia, and then they can go to, I don't know, India and at least draw a series, then we're talking about something slightly different, right? So I think from that perspective, that's where we're at with it. The reason I think we'll see other teams try it. I don't think we'll see much success from it. And the reason I don't think we'll see much success from it is because England were already the best white ball batting team, right? And so it was very easy for them to just go, okay, well, what we're doing in red ball cricket is not working. What if we just try what we're doing in white ball cricket over here? You had a new captain and new coach who had the ability to do that. I am positive that those discussions were had before, but it was in the middle of a previous reign, and it might have even gone back as far as Bayless because they couldn't make any runs, right? So So what you have is a situation where a team was doing so bad that they had to choose the nuclear option. And so far, they haven't nuked themselves, right? That may happen. They might lose their next 2 series. And we're all like, do you remember that flare up? That was fun. And then that disappeared. So if they're going to change cricket forever, I think they need to win at a fairly high rate. And at the moment, they have been. So, but it's going to have to happen home and away for a long, long period of time. But I'm not saying other teams won't copy it. But if you have a look at the run rate of Australia when they started batting quicker, and you have a look at the other teams, there isn't some huge jump from the other teams there, despite the fact that teams got a lot more excitable and certainly thought about that. I would say that the West Indies did eventually change seam bowling, but I don't think they really did it straight away. I think, if you go back, teams like New Zealand, teams like England, I'm trying to think who else would have been in the 80s, even Australia, I suppose. They still believed in having a spinner in their side, and their bowlers were still outswing dependent, right? It's really as Glenn McGrath comes in that you see a bit of a change, and then the bowlers go away from being outswing dependent. But even as much as an impact that those fast bowlers had, and certainly I think the West Indies probably unlocked Pakistan a little bit with their team, and eventually that has made a difference in India as well. But in the mid-90s, if you're watching Test cricket, you weren't watching another team bowling with 4 quicks, right? Like that wasn't something that was that common, even from the non-Asian teams. Like it wasn't something that you saw that much. And so I think it's probably more like that, where you're looking at what the you're looking at what the system is. And like there'll be some teams like, oh, we should copy them, and then be like, well, yeah, how do we copy that? We don't have that. And if you think back to the Australian model that we were talking about before, that late 90s, early 2000s Australian model, they scored a lot quicker, and that obviously helped them win Test matches. But you can do that when you have Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne, because not only do you have 2 of the best attacking bowlers of all time, you also have 2 of the best defensive bowlers of all time, which means that if things get away from you, you can pull back. Jimmy Anderson's probably the only bowler who's not quite on their caliber, but close to that level. Obviously, if Ollie Robinson was ever fit, things might change there. But my guess is that they're going to have more failure from that perspective, just because it's just a natural thing to have happen. And so I wonder how many teams will do it. But England are the only team in one-day cricket who score at a run of ball between overs 10 and 4. In fact, they're the only team in one-day cricket who's ever scored at a run of ball, right? So if you watch India play one-day cricket, or you watch Pakistan play T20 cricket, they're not even batting at the rate that Bazball's batting at sometimes, right? So to think that they're going to suddenly start to do that. I remember, I'm trying to remember the year, I reckon it was 2017, 2018, Australia played England in a bunch of one-dayers. And that was a point when it was quite clear that England were doing something very different in one-day cricket. And I think Australia tried to copy it. Couldn't make it work. They had Finch and Warner, Mitchell Marsh, Glenn Maxwell. They couldn't make it work. And part of the reason they couldn't make it work is they didn't have the depth of batting. So their batting didn't go to 8, 9, and 10 the way that England did. But mostly it didn't work because when they tried to ask Smith to score at a run of ball in those middle overs, he would get dismissed, right? Because it's not a natural thing for him to do. If you said to Smith that you had to score at a strike rate of 60, right, for the rest of your life, we might never dismiss him. But you're telling me he needs to score at 80, 90, 100, and suddenly he has to take big risks and change his natural game for that in a way that Joe Root and Owen Morgan did not. Maybe Dawid Malan and Ben Stokes now do not. And I think that's the difference with all that. So could it change cricket? Yes. Will there be a bunch of Bazball teams? If there are, I don't see any team in world cricket that will give it a good go outside perhaps Sri Lanka, just because they're like, and Sri Lanka have got better of recent times in Test cricket. So I'm not sure why they would suddenly make that choice, but I'm not sure there's another team out there I look at and go, well, this is a team that maybe has the ability to do that. And to be fair, I think Sri Lanka is a fairly ordinary white ball team, probably a better red ball team at the moment. So I don't know how they would do that. So there's a very long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, well, you hit a nerve over there when you said that sometimes Pakistan's T20 team doesn't quite replicate Bazball. And day one of the England-Pakistan series, when I was watching, England going at times 7 and over, I was like, yeah, well, our T20 team sometimes can't manage that. And that definitely says a lot. You see the likes of Shan Masood, who takes a bit of time in T20 cricket,
Yeah.
but then comes out in Test cricket and it's 20 off 11 deliveries and is gone back to the pavilion. Sometimes you're left dumbfounded by those sort of things. But of course, I mean, the game continues to evolve. And I think you rightly pointed out that success matters most when it comes to changing the landscape of the sport. And 9 wins out of 10 test matches is a great start for England. But
It is.
to your
It is.
point,
Remember that the ball was flat for that first series, and had that ball not been flat, I'm not sure they would have been able to do that against India and New Zealand's bowlers. I mean, with all due respect, if you believe in Bazball, you also have to believe that I've forgotten his name. The New Zealand wicketkeeper is one of the best players on earth because they couldn't get him out.
The current one, Blundell?
Yeah, Blundell. That's who I'm thinking of. Too many wicketkeepers. You have to think that he's one of the best players on earth, right? Because they couldn't get him out that summer either. The only difference is he nibbles it around the corner for ones, and they were smashing it everywhere. But yes, you're right. 9 out of 10 wins. They've shot out of the rocket. I wonder if the bigger change might be, I think there has been, especially as more analysts come into the game, I think there's a lot of times where analysts have suggested quite out there theories, and teams have just been like, no, this is how we play cricket. I wonder now if after England, you might get things where you're just like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a player who could do this that makes the most sense.
Do what exactly?
Well, so you've got, maybe it could be a number 7. I don't know. Let's say Mitchell Santner was a slightly better test bowler.
Okay.
Right? And New Zealand is struggling to find a second opening bat.
So you're suggesting that Blundell could go up?
No, Mitchell Santner.
Oh, Mitchell Santner could go up. Interesting. Right? That's like Pakistan opens with Fahim Ashraf or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying either of those players are quite the right player. The original conversation comes from Chris Wokes. Of if Chris Wokes can average 30 at number 8, what can he average batting at first drop, given that England can't find
India tried that with Irfan Pathan. He scored 90 odd, didn't he?
They did. It's happened before. I mean, all these things have happened before, right? Even Bazball, more or less, has happened before.
Oh, yeah. If you remember that test match that New Zealand played under Brendan McCullum's captaincy right in the aftermath of Phil Hughes' death, they completely steamrolled Pakistan in the UAE. I can't remember if it was Abu Dhabi or Dubai. Probably Abu Dhabi.
1996 test match. I think it's 1996. 1998, Sri Lanka tried it against England with Sanacheo Surya. So, and even what Australia did is a different version of Bazball. It was pre-T20, so you played it in a different way. There was still a jump up from what the overall rate was. I'd say England's is a lot more dramatic. So something like Irfan Pathan has happened before. I mean, Vinu Mankad used to open the batting for India. I don't think anyone thought Vinu Mankad was the best, batter. He probably would have been much better, maybe in the middle order, batting at number 6 or 7. But he could average around 30 with the bat opening, which was enough for India to get their middle order players in when the new ball wasn't around. And then he was a frontline bowler, right? Averaging around 30, 35 with the ball. So certainly from that perspective, it's happened before. I think India have tried stuff like that before. So there are things like that you could try that I think would be quite interesting going ahead. However it is that you want to construct an 11. I mean, the perfect team to try with at the moment would be South Africa, right? So South Africa are going into every test match with a number 7 who doesn't make any runs because they can bowl, despite the fact that their bowling is fine. You could actually try some really, really radical lineups with them. And the same, even with T20 teams, I did a big piece on what India could do with the World Cup. India could come up with about 8 different lineups, right? That they could try. If they're saying, okay, the conventional style hasn't worked for them, and it's because their bowlers aren't as penetrative as Pakistan's bowlers are, great. Well, we've tried that, right? Here's option A, B, C, D, E, and F. And in Test cricket, we haven't even got to that kind of thinking yet. And I think what Bazball really does is, and the same as what the West Indies did, the same as what India did in the 1960s, and even what South Africa did in the 90s with all those all-rounders, is that it allows you to suddenly start looking at this and go, well, there are actually other ways of winning. And I think too often in Test cricket, you either copy the best team or you go with the safest model. I would say now, especially with the World Test Championship, but also now, like, does Test cricket even work if people aren't trying to move it forward anymore?
Mhm.
Like if it's sitting there doing the same thing over and over and over again, it's how is it even competing with the other forms, right? And I
Yeah,
think
and
it doesn't need to be like that.
yeah, for sure. And, Bazball is a great example of that as well, because, in an age where you've got 4 T20 leagues running in tandem, you've got the South African one, the UAE one, and the Big Bash League and Bangladesh Premier League. They're all happening at the same time. At this sort of juncture in the sport, you have to make the sport more attractive, and that sport being Test cricket. And I think Bazball has done a great service to, marketing Test cricket in general. So I think that is definitely a plus point. But alluding to your point, which you made earlier, is that we're still yet to see how they fare in India or Sri Lanka, where the ball will take a certain amount of turn. I don't doubt that they'll still go for it, based on the way Ben Stokes talks about Bazball and the whole ideology in general. And yeah, I mean, Australia this summer in the Ashes, that's going to be very, very exciting, considering the pressure that surrounds that sort of a series. And even when they tour Australia, on the bouncy tracks, can they pull it off?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, those are all questions and we don't have answers to them yet. But, you talked about how, you can elevate or promote a lower order batter to the opener position in Test cricket. And I remember your video on Azhar Ali. You described him as the glorious cockroach of Test cricket. He, as you mentioned in that video, started off his career as a tail-ender and consistently played in that position till quite a while, and then, debuted for Pakistan at number 4, I think, and then went on to become Pakistan's mainstay at number 3, even opened the innings quite successfully, might I add. I think Pakistan should have perhaps stuck around with Azhar the opener, because he didn't do too much wrong over there. And he was, in that particular period of his career, really scoring a lot of runs, heaps of runs, was averaging, 56 or 60, somewhere around that mark in that 3-4 year period. And after, I think, that Melbourne double, it kind of all went sideways for Azhar, which, I mean, credit to him for extending his career to 98 test matches, having, reinvented himself constantly and trying to just persist with that same sort of gameplay. And he was a grafter, really, in its entire essence. And that's my next topic, sort of, will we get to see grafters at all in the future? I mean, we saw Saud Shakil do it a bit in this England versus Pakistan series to good measure. It's not that Saud didn't have his shots, right? He does have that back foot punch thing. He uses his feet versus the spinners. So he's quite an attractive batter when he plays his shots. But I'm just thinking it from a young boy's perspective. Now, I'm 10 and I've got Pakistan versus England, the test series on the telly. And in opposition to that, I've got Phil Salt batting in the UAE and literally across the globe. He's a T20 globetrotter and hitting it to all sides of the park. Who will I try to idolize or emulate when I go out there with a bat in hand? Will it be Saud Shakil or Azhar Ali, or will it be Phil Salt? And that's where I really fear for the game. Because we are purists, right? But there's no guarantee that the next generation is going to turn out that way. And it's frightful, because I think Test cricket really has its value. And attritional cricket, too, will continue to have its value, I think, Jarrod. Because, sure, you can increase your run rates on average and everything, but there will be phases of play in Test cricket where the ball is doing a fair bit and you will have to grind it out. So, yeah, what's your take on all of that?
I think there's, I would say, over the last 5 years, we've actually had a slowdown in the strike rate in Test cricket. And
certainly for Pakistan.
While T20 cricket has been taken over, people have been scoring slower in Test cricket. Now, that might change now because of England. And, I did a podcast in, 2020 with an Australian statistician who his big thing was, for the first time ever, the white ball average is higher than the red ball average. Does that mean that people are playing better in white ball cricket and have worked it out than in red ball cricket? And will there be a revolution? It's a fair thing to ask. And with Bazball coming out, even more so. But every time I look at the strike rates, I see Dom Sibley, right? And I see Craig Brathwaite, and I see Dean Elgar. I see all these players. And
Karunaratne.
BJ Watling just retired, right? BJ Watling batted at number 6 with a strike rate of like sub 40. You're right. They're going to look at the TV and they're going to say, we want to do this. But I wonder how long that effect will have to take. But won't a young Cheteshwar Pujara be watching the TV? And won't a young Chris Rogers be watching the TV? And won't a young Craig Brathwaite be watching the TV? I got 2 kids. And I'm sure they would both love to bash the hell out of the ball. But one of them clears his front leg and swings at everything. The other one is really, really interested in stealing singles and defending, right? And they're 8 and 10. They don't even know what their cricket identity is. They don't watch enough cricket on the TV to even understand any of this. This is just them in the backyard. And I watch these two kids think about cricket in such a different way. And a lot of it just comes back to, like, I do wonder, what a young Chris Rogers coming through now, he maybe can't develop the power that he needs. He can't hit the ball hard, but what he can do is still defend better than anyone else and still find a way to squeeze the ball through the gaps. And then when he's on top, he starts to drive a little bit more and everything else. Would he play more T20 cricket coming through when he was younger? Obviously, right? But he might not be any good at it.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going to compare this to the huge revolution we've seen in basketball, right? So there's a couple of different revolutions we've seen in basketball, but the big one that they talk about now is that in American basketball, it's all about individual skills. Can you do what Michael or Kobe did, right? Can you take the ball? Can you isolate and be a great athlete? Be 6'7", do a couple of spin moves, do a fadeaway, dunk, all that sort of stuff, right? And yet, the guy who's probably, I think, favorite at the moment to be the MVP is a 6'11" doughy Serbian dude, right? And why does he dominate the NBA? Because all these other American kids have grown up playing one style of basketball, which is give me the ball on the wing, I'll go one-on-one, maybe give me a pick and roll. And the big doughy guy is like, he sees the entire court. He sees all 10 players at the same time, right? If you'd have told NBA fans 10 years ago that the best player right now would be a 6'11", slow-moving Serbian who's not particularly a great three-point shooter, everyone would have looked at you like you were mad. They would have been, no, it'll be a 6'11" guy who's really fast, who can dunk on everyone. It would be like Giannis would have been the opposite, what everyone would have thought. And if you're watching
or
TV,
Steph Curry, someone who's a perennial three-point shooter.
10 years ago. Yeah. Steph Curry was probably another one. That was just at that point when Steph was coming through, right? Especially 8 years ago. So what you have then is you have a really, in some ways, and you hear the old players talk about Joker, Nikola Jokic is the guy I'm talking about. But you hear the old players talk about him and they're like, that's basketball, right? And that has died away. And why did it have to come from Serbia? Well, it couldn't have come from America at the moment because the Americans aren't really taught that game. And then you look at Luka, again, who's almost like a hybrid between American style and European style. And then you've got Giannis, who, again, is like a passing player, right? Whereas if he was an American, he'd probably be more like Zion, where everything would be about putting the ball in the basket. It's all well and good for a young kid to go, I want to be like LeBron, or I want to be like Ja Morant, or I want to be, that kind of filthy athletic player who puts the ball in the basket and everything else. But you have to play to what you can do, right? So when we say, everyone wants to be Phil Salt, great. Do you have the physical attributes to be Phil Salt? Because I grew up in a generation where everyone said, I grew up in Melbourne during Shane Warne, where everyone tried to be Shane Warne. And we are 30 years on, and I have not seen another Shane Warne. Everyone bowled leg spin in Melbourne. Everyone bowled leg spin in Australia. It didn't work, right? And so what I think at a certain point, you have to realize that, especially when it comes to professional sport, if there is a skill that pays money, someone is going to be naturally good at that and they're going to go into it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair argument. Let me challenge you on that a bit. So we're looking at this proliferation of T20 cricket, right? You see all of these leagues, you see these domestic competitions. If I talk about Pakistan alone, they're dishing in money into the KPL, the XYZPL, all of these different T20 competitions. But then, if you look at the other formats, you've got this one Pakistan Cup for the ODI format. They barely get, 5 to 8 list A games a year. And then the Qaid-e-Azam Trophy also, only runs for 2 months of the year at best. And then the entire year, you've got these T20 competitions. So if I'm a budding cricketer, even if my game is limited in order to get food on the table and make a living out of cricket, wouldn't I want to enhance my game and maybe find different ways of scoring so I can survive in the T20 arena as opposed to the test arena? Because no one watches first-class cricket, and now we're going back to departments. So, I mean, God forbid, who will ever watch PIA versus HPL? I mean, at least with Northern versus KP, you had that region thing going on. Although I do feel that there were not enough regions in Pakistan. 6 teams is far too less in order to produce top talent. But of course, that's just an opinion. But point is that, if you are a young cricketer, and even if you are limited in your skill set, I would think that they'd probably want to enhance it so they can make more money out of it. Whereas in first class cricket, they'll grind it out, they'll play more, tire their bodies out further, especially if you're fast bowler. That becomes a real conversation now. Because on one end, you're bowling 4 overs or at best 10 overs if it's a list day game. And then in first class cricket, you're bowling on those sort of pitches all day in the heat. So yeah, I mean, youngsters would really be perplexed as to what career paths they would want to take. And that's where I feel like maybe T20 cricket will have the edge. But as a counter argument, T20 cricket and all these leagues exist because you have global stars in the game. So if you're just going to have these competitions, who are those global stars? How are they going to establish themselves on the world stage without having played international cricket? So I'm actually quite skeptic at times of the T20 framework as well, because maybe in the future people won't care. I personally don't really watch any of these leagues that are happening in tandem. I'll watch the scorecard at best. I'm actually watching the Under-19 World Cup for the young girls. That's the tournament that I'm busy watching these days. So yeah, I mean, I just like to know, do you think that aspect at all impacts this, or you'll always get those grinders and grafters just because they're just too damn good at it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the best way of answering that is there is still money in first class cricket.
Mm-hmm.
If you told me there's still money. Great. There are still people who get paid to play first class cricket in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
There are how many people live in Pakistan? 200 million? Have I made that number right?
220 million. And I think there were 192 first class cricketers contracted in this previous system. What happens here on, we don't have any idea.
So 220 million people with cricket on the TV all the time. If Test cricket and first class cricket are still paying people, I find it hard to believe that you're not going to get cricketers who are like, I'm just better at that. I can probably build a 15-year career there, and maybe at best I'll be able to play in the CPL for a season and my local competition, right? That is how professionals think. So from that perspective, if you look at someone like Harry Gurney, so Harry Gurney played a whole career where no one ever saw him. His best move probably would have been maybe around 2014, 2015 to get a T20 agent and go around. Why didn't Harry Gurney do that? Partly because he had a contract with Knots that he was like, well, if I give up this contract with Knots, which is, I don't want to put, numbers, but let's say it was worth 100,000 US, right? Hopefully he's paid more than that, but let's say he's paid 100,000 US. He has to give that up in order to go somewhere else. All these freelance cricketers that you're talking about, right? There aren't that many. Most of them stay on the teat of their boards. And the reason they stay on the teat on their boards is it's twofold. One, it's guaranteed money because they know if you are an above average professional cricketer, you should be able to play domestic cricket for 10 to 12 years without any problem whatsoever. The other one is things like insurance, things like healthcare, right? True. These are very important things to a cricketer. Again, as a freelancer, you don't have that. If there's no money in Test cricket, and that's not the case, and if there's no money at all in first-class cricket, which in some places is the case, but more often than not isn't, I'm on your side. Then I'm like, everyone's going to try and change. Can Dom Sibley become a T20 player? Maybe not. The next Vernon Philander, was he even bothered about Test cricket? He might just be like, I can have 2 or 3 good seasons, maybe play some 100 or some Big Bash and make my money.
That's learn the knuckleball.
yeah, exactly. But as we are at the moment, that's not the case. And there's a great recent example, and I think he's played in the PSL, a guy called Chris Lynn, who...
Yeah, he has.
Yeah, sorry, I did it wrong. I always say Chris Lynn. Oh my God. I just done a whole video explaining how I always say the wrong name. Chris Green. Sorry.
Oh, yes, Green. Chris Green. Yeah. He has. Multan, I think. He played for Multan.
He played 126 straight T20 games in his career. And I haven't done the maths, but if anyone else has done more than that without playing another format, good luck to them. 126 consecutive T20 games without playing a list A game or a first class game. And a couple of months ago, he played his first. He made his debut for New South Wales in Sheffield Shield cricket. My guess is that what has happened is that Chris Green is no longer as much in demand as he was. He got called for chucking. His batting hasn't quite developed to the point where he's seen as an all-rounder. Very good player. Everyone loves Chris Green when he's on their side, but he's a spoiler bowler. Like, he's not sexy and can go out of fashion very quickly. And in Asia, they're like, well, we could probably find another off spinner who does more or less what Chris Green does. We don't need him, even if he can bat a little bit and field a lot, right? And so he goes off and he plays first-class cricket. Now, he doesn't have a contract with New South Wales, right? When you read the article, he's like, I always wanted to play Sheffield cricket. Great, we get that. He grew up before T20 cricket was a thing. I understand that was his dream. Then he says, I want a contract with New South Wales, right? He hasn't had a contract. He's been playing professional cricket for 10 years, and the only long-term contract he's had is with his Big Bash side. My guess is, insurance-wise, healthcare-wise, maybe not quite as good as what the others do. Also, Big Bash teams only exist for like 2 months of the year, right?
True.
What sort of support does he get throughout the rest of the year when he wants to go down the nets and get some throwdowns from a coach?
Absolutely.
Does the Sydney Thunder have a coach that can do that? Probably not, right? So you have to understand what this is at the moment. The best way to develop as a young, I talked to this, I'm trying to remember it might have been a coach I was talking to, because he was saying, they'll all go off and play T20. And I said, how do they get good at T20 if you're not throwing the balls in the nets? And he fair. Right? And he's like, they'll get a mentor, they'll get a personal coach. And I said, yeah, I think in the future that will happen a lot more. But at the moment, the people who get personal coaches are like Shan Masood, was an international cricketer and was wealthy already on his own.
Yep.
Alistair Cook, KP. I'm trying to think of some of the other players. Stephen Smith, David Warner, right? Do you know who's not getting, the personal coaches that can travel around the world from them? The mid-level players who want to get to that level. They can't do that. Carlos Brathwaite got to the top of T20 and then dropped down, right? He then had enough money to get, I'm pretty sure he was traveling the world with a fitness consultant. Right? Because he realized that he was fit, but he wasn't fit in the way that he needed to be to get his overs in, right? And he got, I don't want to put words in Carlos Brathwaite's hand because I heard this secondhand from a friend of his, but my memory was he got really, really jacked, right? When he got jacked, he couldn't bowl properly and also wasn't as powerful because actually when you're hitting the ball, the more important strength is usually your core strength, right? And he was suddenly jacked at the top. And the same thing happened with Chris Gale. And I think it might have been Chris Gale who helped him. Carlos Brathwaite could afford to then hire someone who could fix that for him, who could travel around the world. Other players have gone around with dietitians. Chris Gale's another player who went around with a fitness person. Jesse Ryder took a psychologist with him to the IPL. Right? These players are already accepting money. How do you get to that level? All of those players came through the first-class system, right? And the one player who kind of hasn't is Nicholas Pooran. Nicholas Pooran was 24, and I would say he was in the best six batters at the World Cup in 2019, right? Okay, if you're Nicholas Pooran, you can skip the system at the moment. Chances are, if you're not Nicholas Pooran, I don't think you can skip the system. And you need, you need access to 2 and 3 bowlers. You need access to probably some old vet who plays at your first class team. You need access to a bowling coach. You need access to maybe the academy bowling coach. You need access to all these different things. At the moment, that is still a system that comes from first class cricket. All that could change, right? And everything you're saying makes sense. But I would say this, all these years on, where are all the freelance cricketers? Where are all the 20-year-olds going freelance? That might happen in the next 5 to 10 years. But I can tell you why it hasn't happened. And it's something that Tamal Mills told me on a podcast once. And he's like, well, why would I leave a guaranteed contract?
That is true. I mean, something for you to listen to Azam Khan if you're watching this. I mean, I wish you all the best in your freelance T20 career. But yeah, I definitely get your point that level of security that you get with, when you're employed as a stable sort of cricketer and you're a part of the season and you're getting those benefits along with that definitely does weigh on your mind.
Yeah, if you think about it just from a tennis perspective, right? So I don't know if you know this, but the average age of tennis players hasn't got older, right? In the top 400 of men's, and I think it's the same in women's, but I remember reading an article about men's. The average age hasn't got older, but you're like, well, wait a minute. Roger Federer and Murray and all these guys are like 80, right? And they're still playing tennis. And so you sit in there going, well, that doesn't make sense. Why isn't it getting older? And the reason it didn't get any older is when you come through, and, you know, I have friends who tried to make it as professional tennis players. When you come through, you don't have a coach. You don't have a physio. You don't have a dietitian. You got no money. You're staying in some backpackers in Hong Kong, trying to, you know, make enough money on the Chinese tour to get to a point that you go to a Grand Slam and maybe you qualify for all that sort of stuff. It's ridiculous, right? When you get to the top 100, and it's probably top 50, but certainly to the top 100, you can afford probably to bring a coach with you.
Fair enough. Yeah. And that's why they've got such prolonged careers. And that's actually a very valid point, because if you look at the last 2 decades, it's been Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and you've got the Stan Wawrinkas and the Cilics.
You're talking about people with like entourages, right? Of like some of those people will have 8 to 12 people on their payroll to make them better at tennis, right? If you're a cricketer right now, the only way to have that many people looking after you 12 months of the year is to go through a first-class system.
Yeah.
Right? The only other way is to suddenly have a breakout. And even Nicholas Puran was so talented. Look at his record over the last couple of years. And I haven't talked to him. He's a really honest kid. I reckon if you sat him down and really, well, he's not a kid anymore. He's a kid when I knew him.
He was a former captain now, so has had a fair bit of experience under his belt.
Exactly. I reckon if you sat him down right now and said, if I gave you this system, would that have been better? And he would go, of course, that's what I wanted. But he had a falling out with Trinidad, and then T20 came calling. It was happenstance the way that happened with him. And he has struggled the last couple of years. But he has the ability now to get his own coach and everything else. And, you know, hopefully we'll still see an above average player. But Nicholas Puran was the best player in the under-19 World Cup. He was the best junior player in the world at one stage. You could argue. Maybe outside, maybe a couple of Indian players coming through. He was just absolutely incredible. And he's still clawing onto a T20 career because he hasn't got that other system. And at the moment, that's where it is. My big thing is, to go back to the Chris Green example of, you're talking about all these different T20 leagues. Actually, what we're seeing, I think, more now is that as the IPL owners buy all these teams, and maybe the Glazers and the Americans start doing a similar thing.
Right. They're already doing it, right? The Glazers do own a team.
Glazers do, but there are other Americans involved. You know, Satya Nadella, he's got a major league team. You know, there's going to be a lot more American money coming into cricket in the next 10 years. And then there'll be the Pakistan billionaires and the Bangladesh billionaires, right? All that sort of stuff is going to keep coming in. So we're going to have more of those people. My guess is, though, the way that it is currently structured is that Trent Bolt will play in 4 leagues, right? And he'll play in the best 4 leagues. And he will then have financial security to be able to do that. What about the sub-Trent Bolt players?
True. They've got to make a name for this.
Yeah, if you are, I'm trying to think. Give me a New Zealand seamer who's not quite
Matt Henry, but no, I like Matt Henry.
Matt Henry's a really good example.
Really,
if you're Matt Henry, and you go, well, wait a minute, if Trent Bolt's not going to play Test cricket, does that mean I'm an automatic choice? True. Is it me and Kyle Jamieson and a little when Tim Southey until he retires? Oh, why don't I go back and do that? Because otherwise, what am I going to be doing? I might get a couple of games in the PSL. I might be a backup in Major League Cricket. I might play Blast, but not 100, whatever it may be, right? You know, all these different players. And they're like, and then they're on the freelance market, right? And what if I get an injury? And then what if I play in I get subbed in at the last minute to play in the I don't know, the CPL final or the Major League final or the South African final, and I get hit for 28 runs in the last over, and that's what everyone remembers, and no one hires me. But if I go back to New Zealand, and I don't have to compete with Trent Bolt every week anymore, and maybe Kyle Jamieson anymore, maybe he goes and does a contract, and maybe Tim Southey retires.
He's going to retire at some point.
Yeah, well, hopefully. That's how professional cricketers think, right? Because they are always thinking, what is the best option for me right now? And at the moment, everything you've said is possible going into the future. That is not where we are. And we need to remember where we are. And, you know, when Dirk Nannes went freelance in 2009 or 2010, I was like, well, here we go. This is it. And then you think, wait a minute. Dirk Nannes didn't come through that system, so he never cared for the Victorian system. He was a friggin' skier, right? Then he has a business on the side. So he's thinking to himself, well, I can make a lot of money in a short period of time by going bang, 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 bang. I'll play for Middlesex. I'll play for RCB. You know, I'll do all this sort of stuff.
I'll get
But
a
I've got
World Cup in for the Netherlands. He did that
World
as
Cup for the
well.
Netherlands, World Cup for Australia, right?
Yes.
All without really being contracted. I don't even think he had an
Mhm.
Australian contract. Even when he played for Victoria, he might have had a contract for a little while and then gave it up, right? But he's got a business
Right.
that's giving him money on the other side, right? So he's like, oh, okay, well, I can take this risk. Most players, their career is their business.
All right.
And
So, yeah, first class cricket equals financial security. And that's a fantastic point. I 100% do concur with that. You might have even changed my mind. And I really hope that cricket does go in this direction and it stays that way. It doesn't like go in the direction that I was kind of painting, because I don't want that to happen. But let me take this conversation a little bit elsewhere. So, first class cricket is big in Australia. Everyone really cares a lot about the Sheffield Shield. Everyone cares a lot about county cricket. Even the Ranji Trophy in India has quite a fair bit of following, and people actually do tune into that. But when you take first class cricket in other countries, maybe it's not the same case over there. So what can countries like Pakistan, for instance, do to market first class cricket better? I mean, making better pitches would be a start, of course. Even contests between bat and ball, that would be great. And the Rawalpindi pitch actually was known to produce such pitches. You might be surprised, but
I know, I saw the
in the
numbers.
first class circuit, Rawalpindi was producing great pitches which were assisting fast bowlers. So that's one problem. And then specifically for countries which are outside the big three and are test playing nations, Jarrod, you're playing what, 6 to 8 test matches a year? Whereas these top nations like India, England, and Australia, they're playing a minimum of 11 to 12 tests a year. They have these 4 test, 5 test match series, whereas we have these 2 test match series where it's so hard to even hand a debut to a player, right? Because you give him one game, he doesn't work out. You give him the second one, he doesn't work out. Does he ever play again? Or do you give him that second game? If you've lost the first one, you want to level the series, you've got a guy coming in back from injury or anything. It's just a really, really tough predicament with respect to squad selection, and then how to motivate your players to remain focused towards the longest format when you're going to play after every 4 or 5 months and you're going to average 6 to 8 tests a year. And unfortunately, players like Babar Azam, they're, cream of the crop and one of the top batters in world cricket. And I don't know if he's going to play 100 tests or not. And that breaks my heart. So, the gulf that's been created between the well-endowed boards and the rest, this, I think, will also have a negative impact on test cricket, because ultimately, if you only have 3 or 4 nations competing at the highest level, then is it even going to survive?
Well, the interesting thing is you could argue that that's always been the case. So
In a
it's
way.
a real... Well, I mean, realistically,
West
England...
Indies wasn't really well endowed when they had their,
West Indies cricket has never had any money. It's never had any money, right? First class cricket in the West Indies, I got some good crowds back in the old days, don't get me wrong, but not enough to make any money. It wasn't televised or anything like that. For the longest period of time, the only professional league was county cricket, right? And yet, even through that, the West Indies became the best team in the world. South Africa became the best team in the world. Australia became the best team in the world. So I think people are still going to want to play cricket anyway. And I do think there will be to go back to the previous answer, I think what will happen is there'll be splits, right? A bit like car racing, where people who are more skilled at one thing over another will go in that direction, or they'll see a career there and they'll be like, wow, I've got a 15-year career there and I might have a 3-year career here. I'll go and take that and I'll be fine. And cricketers do think in those sorts of terms. And I think that right now, I still think there is money to be made in playing red ball cricket. Even when you're talking about low money, I still think that there are a lot of people in places like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, who, if you told them what a first-class cricketer made, they'd probably still take that wage, right? And the same with the West Indian cricketers, fair. Right? But also, I think it is, if you're seeing it as a development system, which it is at the moment, then people will come through it. I agree with you, but I don't. The weird thing is, I think the biggest schism we're seeing at the moment is probably in T20 cricket, where India, Pakistan, Australia, England, South Africa, am I missing someone? New Zealand, are so far ahead of the other teams. Right. Maybe with Sri Lanka barely holding on to that group, but I think Sri Lanka is a way back. And that is in the league where people are getting paid money.
True.
Right? That's where the money is more fair. And if you're a great West Indian player, you're still going to get paid in T20 cricket. You're still going to get your bag, right? And yet we're not seeing that development. So I think that there's a reason why those countries are richer. There's a reason why those countries have more talent. There's a reason why those countries, are better at cricket. And so I think all those things do play a part. I think that there's going to be, within the next 10 to 15 years, I don't think you can go on with, is it the West Indies playing 24 test matches over 5 years or whatever it is? And another team playing, as you said, 55 or 60, right? It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, England plays series even outside the World Test Championship cycle because they need to get their quota in for test matches in a year, which I think is great. I would love to see Pakistan do that with like the likes of Afghanistan or Ireland. But
yeah, no, you're right.
That way.
I remember the amount of times that like I'm looking at like the highest run scorers and like someone like Stuart Broad would be on the list. Just because like he hasn't made any runs. It's just that they've played like 50 test matches in 5 years, right? And some other batter who's probably averaging 40 has probably played like 20 test matches. And so Stuart Broad's above them on the list. I mean, you see, it's ridiculous how many games they play. So I think it's an unsustainable model. And I think that's really what you're getting at. I don't think this will be the model going forward. I'd be very surprised. Uday Shankar has just, he was the star executive who's just moved to another company, Viacom, who just got the women's IPL. And
They've made that, the third most prosperous, or not prosperous isn't the right word, the third most cash-rich women's league across sport, right?
Right.
If I'm not wrong.
I talked to him more than a decade ago. I spent about an hour with him. Really intelligent guy. And I'm going to say this now because he's really famous and he's moved jobs, so I don't think it'll be a problem. But he sort of like leant into me and he said, do you realize how little we pay for Test cricket when we know how much it's worth? TV executive said this. And not just that, a pioneering TV executive was saying this to me. And he took me through it and he said, what you have is you have an older audience, so it's not quite as sexy. He said, but they come back day after day after day after day. Advertisers know exactly what to target to them. It swings male, very, very male heavy, very, very 30 to 55-year-old male heavy. You know exactly what to advertise to them. They pay more for their products because they've lived a life and they've got some money. And I know I've got 40 hours of content, right? This was a decade ago. I'd be shocked if, and I've had this conversation with cricket boards going, they're laughing at you. They know. And the reason that it hasn't made more money is because it hasn't been put into a structure where at the moment, if Pakistan play New Zealand, you're trying to sell it to the Pakistan body and the New Zealand body. Now, neither of those, when it comes to TV deals, they're not particularly prosperous, right? Now imagine you're selling it as an overall package. Right. And in order to get England, Australia, and India, you're going to have to get Pakistan, New Zealand. But also, we now know exactly when Pakistan and New Zealand are going to go. And the broadcasters can start to hype it up weeks in advance. What happens now is if England buys Pakistan, New Zealand, some of these deals, I shit you not, are getting made a day or two in advance. Right?
I can see it. You can totally see it when it's happening. There's barely any marketing. There's barely any hype. Sure, the England series and Australia series had a lot of hype, but people didn't even know New Zealand was coming right after. I mean, we know because we're cricket nuts, but people didn't know. They were like,
but even some of the Indian series, they're sold right at the last minute so that no one can hype them up. They're hyped because it's India, but the TV company isn't hyping it because you don't even know who you're going to sell to sometimes. I promise you, it is such a crazy system. If that was done properly, and I'm talking about a league structure, but it may be a private league. It may be just a millionaire, well, it would be a billionaire would come in and go, well, wait a minute. I still think there's $2 billion worth of value in 4 to 5 day cricket. I'm going to make everything day night. I'm going to maybe I'll do it as a franchise system. So you've got to have 6 players from your home country, but then you can pick anyone else. Again, I think you'll start to see a few people playing Test cricket at that point when there's a bit more money on. So all these things are available to you. If that happens, and I can't see Test cricket dying, but what I can see is I don't really see the point of one team playing 10 times a year and another team playing 2 times a year. And I think that is a really, really interesting one in the short term of how that plays out. That is not how I expect Test cricket to be in 20 years' time. I think it's either completely dead, but I'm very doubtful of that. I think it's a very good chance that someone has franchised it in one way or another, or they've managed to make it into a league, but officially make it into a league. Those are the 3 different options that we have. The current system is stupid. right? And this was the FTP to fix it. And of course, they fucked it up again. Sorry if you can't swear on your podcast.
That's okay. I mean,
but they did.
We're shutting down anyway, so it's okay. Your swear is fine. But yeah, that's a very good, interesting sort of predicament over there. Franchise cricket, but in first-class cricket, and that I think might even work, especially if you bring day-night tests or day-night first-class games into the mix. And I really hope we're headed to that sort of a future, because that would make it more attractive. And you have to take into account the level of prestige that first-class cricket holds in certain countries. I know England has it. India, even to a certain extent, has it. Australia, people are big on the Sheffield Shield. I mean,
no one goes.
I was looking at the test the other day.
No one goes.
No, but still, you look at what it meant to Scotty Boland to play for Victoria for 12 years, even before making his Australian debut. So there's a level of pride over there, and that's what I think Pakistan needs to work on in terms of prestige building. Because if you don't make the longer format into a viable product, and people don't consume it, or even the players who are playing it don't feel that level of pride that, okay, we're representing our region or team or whatsoever. I think that's very important, because ultimately, and Mike Atherton pointed this out to me very, very recently when I interviewed him, was that someone like Harry Brook, it's great to see that even though he's, gotten his claim to fame in international cricket via the franchise model, and now while he's playing test cricket, he wants to play test cricket. And that's ultimately what you need. You want players to be playing the longest format. Sorry, you said?
No. So if you go back to that Chris Green thing from before, we still have a generation of cricketers who think that Test cricket is the most important form of the game, right? That Kieran Pollard gets sledged by Australians because they go, mate, you didn't play Test cricket. We don't give a shit about you, right? That still matters at the moment. It may not matter in 10 years. It may not matter in 20 years, but it certainly is going to matter over the next 5 years. Right. And you have sort of this, I think players eventually still go to where the money is, but they also want to get the respect of other players. They want to be thought of as the best player. They don't want to be thought of as, someone who couldn't master Test cricket. Right?
That's actually true, because what the Mohammad Ahmed retirement from Test cricket did was that it spurred all of these other guys like Shaheen Shah Afridi, Haris Rauf, Naseem Shah to really make it known that they do want to excel at Test level. Whether they say that to protect their futures or whether they actually feel that, it doesn't matter, because they have their priorities straight. And well, I really hope Pakistan can manage their fast bowlers better, so we can get these guys, at least Shaheen and Naseem, for every Test match that Pakistan plays, because we don't play a lot anyway. And you need these two guys in order to get 20 wickets as things stand. But anyway, I think that should wrap it up. We're also past the 50-minute mark, but it was an absolute pleasure, Jarrod, to be able to pick your brain and debate this topic with you. I loved the discourse that ensued, and I really hope that the vision that you have, or the ideas that you have with respect to where the sport is headed, they do come to life. And yeah, it's been very enlightening. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been an absolute privilege. Yeah, go for it.
No, I just want to say I want to thank everyone at Grassroots Cricket. I know it hasn't probably ended the way that you guys all had envisaged, and I'm sure it was a very exciting place to work at times, where you sort of all came together, making something. I thought it was great, and I think there were probably tweaks to the business model that could have come in that may have made it more successful. But from the big boss man all the way down to the I don't know who, the lowly social graphics makers. I thought you did really interesting stuff. It was one of the more interesting media things. So I think it's a real shame, but there's clearly a lot of talent involved in that endeavor, and I hope that those people go on to get more work in cricket. It's a really interesting time for cricket media, and I think that hopefully Grassroots gets remembered as trying to do the right thing in a place where most cricket media now seems to be that player doesn't like this other player, or that player's wife doesn't like this other player's wife, or and all this sort of stuff, where you guys did it the right way. And
everyone throwing the word intent around and selfish around.
Can I tell you my favorite? My favorite one is it's actually something different, and you see it a little bit in Pakistan, but you see it in heaps of the aggregator sites, cricket aggregator sites in cricket in India, which is they use the phrase netizens disgusted with Rishabh Pant's facial expressions. So what did he do? He was standing on the field. Netizens disgusted as Sarfaraz blows a bubble of chewing gum. So what? And so we've moved on from Shoaib Akhtar says blah 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 to literally some dude on Twitter said. So look, I really like what you were doing, and I think there's obviously a lot of talent there. But yeah, I just think it's an important thing to remember that this is a very hard thing to do. I don't think it was probably structured the way it should have been, but from a talent point of view and from a heart point of view, I think you guys were definitely going in the right direction. It's a real shame that it hasn't come across, but hopefully someone else will work out this space very soon. And I think that even if you only did it for a little while, I think it was you were trying to do the right thing, but more importantly, I do think that you help Pakistan cricket. And in the media, that's not really your job. Your job is to criticize things and to analyze and get things right and break news. But I do think that it was something that Pakistan cricket needed, and hopefully the PCB have a look at this and go, well, is there a way that we can supplement this? And I don't know if you know this, but you guys have obviously run out of money and you haven't made the success of it if you wanted. Currently, county cricket is the reporting on county cricket is paid for by the ECB, right? That's because no one has come up with a good enough business model to be able to make money from county cricket. You guys were trying to do it on your own from scratch, and I think you did an absolutely brilliant job. And it's I think that a lot of you, yourself included, have a very good future in this if you can do the tricky bit. The tricky bit isn't getting the first job. The tricky bit is the hanging around bit between jobs, if we're being honest. So good luck to you and to everyone else, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Jarrod. That is high praise indeed coming from you. And I'm sure the rest of the team will be really chuffed to hear those words coming from you, because we've all been privy to your work ever since we've been kids, really. And I don't mean to make you feel old or anything.
I am very old.
Jarrod Kimber's articles are always on my itinerary whenever I saw it. And Polite Inquiries, like literally, that is how we got to know about Polite Inquiries. And even right now, your YouTube channel is extremely popular. And your love affair with Pakistan cricket, it goes a long way. And people over here absolutely love you. And when I was talking to people, telling them that I'm about to have a podcast with Jarrod Kimber, they were super excited, perhaps even more excited than Michael Atherton. So I mean, you're absolutely brilliant.
Athis is boring. No one gives a shit about Athis. You probably cancel that episode, mate. I don't think anyone's waiting for it.
But yeah, I mean, you're a fan favorite over here, and you're brilliant at what you do. So continue to do that, and we'll obviously keep tuning in. And yeah, as Jarrod said, that in county cricket, the ECB pays journalists to do that reporting job. So if anyone from the PCB is watching this, listen to Jarrod. Get us all jobs. Get us back on the road. But anyway, that's a wrap for this episode. And perhaps this is the final episode of the Beyond the Crease podcast brand. And it's been an absolute pleasure. We at Grassroots Cricket, we tried our best to change the landscape of cricket coverage in Pakistan, move it away from sensationalism and bring the focus back towards the cricket. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as well. And a big thank you to Jarrod for agreeing to this. That's all for now, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.